The Mafia boss spoke Arabic. Only the black maid replied, silencing Capos. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. It was an ordinary day at the Romano mansion, but today, everything was about to change. Mafia boss John Romano sat at the head of a grand, long table surrounded by his capos, discussing the latest moves in his empire. The mansion itself was an exquisite piece of architecture, with polished marble floors that reflected the light from the chandeliers above, and the air thick with the smell of expensive cigars and Italian leather. John, a man in his early 40s, with sharp features and an intense gaze, commanded the attention of everyone in the room with his mere presence. His dark suit, tailored to perfection, highlighted his broad shoulders, and his demeanor, calm yet unyielding, showed why he was feared by many. But today, there was something different. John had decided to impress his international contacts with his linguistic skills, and to everyone's surprise, he chose to speak in Arabic. The room fell into a stunned silence as he effortlessly spoke the words in a language few understood. His capos exchanged confused glances, unsure how to react. Arabic wasn't a language commonly spoken in their circles, and certainly not by someone like John Romano. As John finished his statement, the capos awkwardly shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable. They were used to John's power, his strategic mind, his ruthlessness, but this was new territory. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Just then, in the midst of the silence, a figure entered the room. Maria Collins, the black maid, a woman of quiet strength, stood in the doorway, her presence nearly unnoticed by the men at the table. She had been working at the Romano estate for over 5 years, but she was never one to stand out, always keeping her head down, focusing on her tasks. But today was different. As John spoke, he made no effort to look around or see who was present, his focus solely on his business. That's when something remarkable happened. Without hesitation, Maria stepped forward. In the silence that followed John's words, she spoke, answering him in perfect Arabic, her voice calm but firm. The room went silent again, but this time, the shock was palpable. Maria's words were not only correct, but also precise. It wasn't just the language, it was the way she said it, with an understanding that stunned everyone in the room. The capos, who were already uncomfortable with the situation, were now completely thrown off. They had never expected the maid, the woman they barely noticed, to respond with such confidence and mastery. John, too, was taken aback. He had always seen Maria as just another servant, someone who cleaned and took care of his estate. But now, in front of him, she had shown a skill he hadn't anticipated. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, there was a strange stillness between them. Maria stood her ground, her calm demeanor belying the tension that had settled into her chest. It was a moment of profound silence, broken only by the soft click of John's chair as he leaned back, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak immediately, but his gaze never left her. The capos, still unsure of what had just transpired, exchanged confused looks. John's reputation as a powerful and calculating man was undisputed, but Maria's response had introduced a new element, one they weren't prepared for. John had expected their silence to be filled with awe at his knowledge, but instead, it was Maria's calm words that had silenced the room. The balance of power in that room had just shifted, not through violence or intimidation, but through the quiet authority of a woman who had been overlooked for far too long. John broke the silence with a low chuckle, a sound that made the capos uneasy. He wasn't angry. If anything, he was intrigued. His eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, he regarded Maria with respect, even admiration. The room was still, the tension thick, but there was something else now. Something new, something unexpected. John remained still for a moment, staring at Maria as though he had just discovered something new about her, something that he couldn't have expected. His capos, on the other hand, were less impressed, their disbelief turning to awkward silence. They had seen many things in their time with John, but never had they seen someone, especially a maid, stepped forward so confidently in his presence. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, the kind that made even the toughest men uneasy. Maria, however, stood her ground, her posture straight and calm, her expression unreadable. John leaned forward slightly, still processing what had just happened. The woman he had dismissed for so long had just shown him that she was more than a mere servant. Her ability to speak Arabic, a language he thought only his associates understood, felt like a slap in the face. But it wasn't just the language. It was her demeanor, the way she commanded the room without saying a word. The respect that had been built on power, fear, and dominance suddenly seemed fragile. It was a stark contrast to the power dynamics he had created over the years. His eyes narrowed, studying her with a new kind of intensity. "You know Arabic?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and challenge. Maria didn't flinch. "I grew up in a neighborhood where it was spoken," she replied simply, her voice steady and unshaken. "I learned it when I was young, before I started working here." John nodded slowly, taking in her words. The room remained silent as the Capos looked at one another, unsure of how to respond. "Interesting," John muttered under his breath. "I didn't know you had it in you." Maria remained silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood the weight of the moment. She had always kept to herself, performing her duties without ever drawing attention to herself. But now, for the first time, John saw her not as just a maid, but as someone who had the ability to surprise him, to challenge his view of the world. The Capos exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort growing. One of them, a tall man named Vincent, cleared his throat. "Boss," he began cautiously, "what do we do now?" John waved a dismissive hand, signaling Vincent to remain quiet. His mind was racing. The situation wasn't what he had expected, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. On one hand, he respected Maria for having the courage to speak up, for breaking the silence in the room when no one else dared. On the other hand, she had crossed a line by asserting herself in such an unexpected way. It was a moment of vulnerability for John. He had built his empire on the idea that power and control could be easily maintained, but Maria had shown him that there were cracks in that illusion. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He looked around at the Capos, all of them waiting for his next move. He had always been the one to dictate the pace of things, to lead with authority. But now, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure how to proceed. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, until John finally broke it with a sharp exhale. "Maria," he said, his tone softer now, but still carrying the weight of his authority. "You've surprised me. I didn't expect that." Maria, her heart pounding in her chest, nodded slightly. She had anticipated this moment. She knew John would either respect her for her intelligence or try to dismiss it. But she also knew that speaking up had given her something she hadn't had before, a voice. John leaned back in his chair, his eyes still locked on Maria. "You've earned my respect today," he said slowly, almost as if he were testing the words on his tongue. "But don't expect me to forget this." Maria met his gaze with quiet determination. "I didn't expect you to," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The room fell into another silence, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came after a storm had passed, leaving a strange sense of calm in its wake. John's mind was still spinning, trying to make sense of the shift in power that had just occurred. He had always believed that those in positions of power were the ones who held the cards, the ones who decided who mattered. But now, for the first time, he was starting to wonder if that was really true. Maria had proven that there was more to people than just their social status, more to them than the roles they played. And in that moment, John realized that he might have underestimated her. As the Capos shifted uncomfortably in their seats, John finally stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice firm again, but with a new undercurrent of respect. Maria remained where she was, her hands steady at her sides. As she watched him leave the room, she couldn't help but wonder what this new dynamic would mean for her future in the Romano household. But for now, she had done something she never thought she could do. She had made her voice heard. The following days at the Romano mansion were filled with an uneasy silence. John Romano had always been a man of control, but now, for the first time in a long while, he found himself reflecting on the events that had transpired. He had never expected Maria to challenge him, to stand out in a way that had shaken the very foundation of his authority. The way she had calmly replied to him in Arabic, a language he had assumed only he and his trusted associates understood, was something he couldn't easily forget. It wasn't just the language, it was the quiet confidence, the strength in her voice that left a mark on him. John had always prided himself on being able to read people, to understand them at a glance, but Maria had caught him off guard. She was not just a maid. She was something more. As the days passed, John couldn't help but find his thoughts returning to her. He would see her moving around the mansion, doing her work, always silent, always efficient, but now with a sense of respect he hadn't afforded her before. She had earned that, whether he liked it or not. Maria, on the other hand, felt a shift in the way she was treated by the others. The Capos, though still wary, no longer saw her as just a servant. There was an unspoken acknowledgement of her intelligence, her ability to navigate the world around her with quiet grace. She had always kept to herself, doing her job without attracting attention, but now, something had changed. She wasn't just a maid in the eyes of those who worked in the mansion. She was a person who had proven her worth. Yet, despite the newfound respect, Maria remained cautious. She had seen enough in her years working at the Romano estate to know that things could change in an instant. People with power, people like John, didn't like to feel vulnerable. And while John had shown her respect, she couldn't ignore the possibility that his view of her could shift back to one of disdain at any moment. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy the small victories. She had made her voice heard, and that, in itself, was something she hadn't been able to do before. It was a quiet victory, but it was hers. One evening, as Maria was finishing her work in the kitchen, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see John walking towards her, his dark suit reflecting the soft glow of the kitchen light. He didn't speak immediately, but his presence filled the room. Maria felt a small knot form in her stomach, unsure of what he wanted, but she stood tall, refusing to let her nerves show. "Maria," John said after a long pause, his voice low, "I've been thinking about what happened a few days ago." Maria looked up at him, not quite meeting his gaze, but not backing away either. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady. John regarded her for a moment before speaking again. "You've shown me something," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You've shown me that there's more to you than I thought." Maria didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. "I've been thinking," John continued, his voice quieter now, "about the way I've treated you. About the way I've treated everyone here, really. I've always believed that power was the only thing that mattered. But you've made me realize that maybe there's more to people than just what they do for me." Maria remained silent, not sure how to respond. She had never heard John speak like this before. "I want to make it right," John said after a moment. "I want to offer you something more. Something that shows I respect you." Maria was taken aback. She had never expected to hear these words from him, especially after everything that had happened. But she didn't dare speak just yet, unsure if this was another test, another moment to see if she would react in a way that pleased him. "I'm offering you a position," John said, his voice firm now. "A real position, not as a maid, but as something more." Maria blinked, unsure of what he meant. "A position where you'll have more responsibility, more influence. I think you've earned it." John's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Maria stood there, processing what he had said. She had never imagined this moment would come, never imagined that John, of all people, would offer her something more than the menial tasks she had been given for years. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment that would shape her future in ways she couldn't yet understand. "I'll think about it," Maria said finally, her voice steady, though her heart raced. John nodded, his expression unreadable. "Take your time," he said. "But know this, Maria. You've earned my respect, and that's not something I give away easily." As John turned to leave, Maria stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words settling in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a real chance to change her circumstances, to rise above the limitations she had once accepted as her fate. The next few days were filled with a quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. Maria had agreed to consider John's offer, but the decision weighed heavily on her mind. The possibility of a new position, one with more responsibility and influence, was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent years working in the background, doing her job without question, without ever expecting to be seen or recognized. But now, John had given her a chance to step into a world she had never imagined. As she moved through the mansion, going about her daily tasks, she couldn't help but notice the change in how people treated her. The Capos, who once ignored her entirely, now nodded when she passed, offering a respectful glance. The house staff, who had always seen her as just another part of the furniture, now looked at her with curiosity. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Maria was no longer just the maid. She was someone who had earned a different kind of respect. Still, she kept her thoughts to herself. She knew better than to get too comfortable in her newfound position. John's offer, while flattering, was not something she could take lightly. She had seen too many people rise quickly only to fall just as fast. But the thought of what this opportunity could mean for her, of what it could mean for her future, kept her awake at night. She had spent so many years struggling, working multiple jobs just to make ends meet, to keep her family afloat. The idea of a new life, one where she could have a voice, where she could matter beyond her work, was something she hadn't dared to dream about for a long time. One evening, as the sun began to set and the mansion was bathed in a warm golden light, John found himself walking down the hall towards the kitchen. Maria was in there, as usual, preparing dinner for the staff. She was focused on her work, but when she saw him enter, she stopped what she was doing, standing still, waiting for him to speak. John's footsteps echoed in the quiet room as he came closer. His presence was always commanding, and tonight was no different. He paused for a moment, looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "Maria," he said, his voice steady but soft, "I've been giving some thought to what you said, about taking time to think." Maria met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice calm. "I've thought about it a lot, too." John nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers. "I want to make sure you understand what I'm offering," he said. "This isn't just a position. It's a chance for you to change the direction of your life. You've proven yourself, not just with your intelligence, but with your character. That's what I value." Maria felt a small flutter in her chest. The sincerity in his words was unexpected. She had always seen John as a man of power, someone who made decisions quickly and decisively, never hesitating. But now, as he spoke to her, there was something else, something softer. "You've earned my respect," John continued, "and I want to see you grow. But you have to make the choice, Maria. It's yours to make." Maria was silent for a long moment, processing his words. She had spent years in silence, always watching from the sidelines, never daring to ask for more. But now, she was being given a choice, a real choice. The fear of the unknown was still there, but it was fading. She could feel herself standing at the edge of something new, something bigger than she had ever imagined. Finally, she spoke. "I'll accept your offer," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of resolve. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." John smiled, a small but genuine smile, something she had rarely seen on his face. "Good," he said. "You won't regret it. And I'll make sure you have everything you need to succeed." As John turned to leave, Maria felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was the beginning of something new, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her future. She had made the decision, and now, she was ready to step into a new chapter of her life. In the weeks that followed Maria's decision, things at the Romano mansion shifted in ways she had not expected. John had kept his promise. The new position he offered her wasn't just a title, it was a transformation. Maria was now handling more than just the household duties. She was involved in meetings, helping John manage the day-to-day operations of his estate. It wasn't the power she had envisioned as a child, but it was a kind of power nonetheless. One that came from knowledge, understanding, and the trust John had placed in her. The Capos, who once had viewed her with indifference, now looked to her for advice and direction. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the same people who had once ignored her were now seeking her input. Maria was cautious, careful not to let the newfound respect cloud her judgment. She knew that being in John's inner circle meant walking a fine line. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. One evening, as she walked through the mansion, she noticed John standing by the large window in his office, looking out over the sprawling estate. It was a rare sight. John was always busy, always surrounded by people, always in control. But tonight, he was alone, and for a moment, he seemed distant. Maria hesitated for a moment before entering the room. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft. John turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "It's just the usual," he replied, his voice low. "Business, pressure, the weight of everything." Maria nodded, understanding more than he realized. She had seen the toll it took on him, the constant juggling of responsibilities, the endless decisions that had to be made. She had never seen this side of him before, the side that wasn't the Mafia boss, but simply a man who had to carry the weight of it all. "You don't have to do it alone, you know," Maria said, stepping further into the room. John raised an eyebrow, surprised by her words. "I'm not alone," he said, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I have people who help, people I trust." "That's not the same," Maria said gently. "People can help with the tasks, but they can't carry the weight of the decisions. They can't carry the burden of what it means to be in your position." John looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching her face as if weighing her words. "You've been different lately," he said finally. "More than just a maid, more than just someone I can rely on for the basics. You've shown me a side of things I hadn't seen before." Maria wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had never sought to be anything more than what she was. But now, it seemed, she was more than just a servant. She was someone who had earned her place in this world, someone who could be trusted to make decisions, someone who had John's respect. "I'm just trying to help," Maria said after a pause. "That's all I've ever wanted." John nodded, his eyes softening. "You've done more than that," he said quietly. "You've made a difference." The silence that followed was comfortable, the air thick with unspoken understanding. Maria had never expected to have this kind of relationship with John. She had never expected to be more than a maid in the mansion. But now, as she stood there with him, she realized that things had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the power or the position. It was about the trust, the mutual respect that had been built between them over time. It was about being seen, not just as a servant, but as a person who mattered. "I think you've earned more than you know," John said, his voice firm once again. Maria smiled, though it was a quiet smile, one that spoke of the quiet pride she felt in herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. It wasn't the life she had once dreamed of, but it was a life she had earned. And that, in itself, was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Maria continued to settle into her new role within the Romano household. The mansion, once a place of cold marble floors and distant, intimidating rooms, now felt more like a space where her presence truly mattered. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who had earned a voice, and with it, a place at the table. John, for all his power and control, seemed to trust her in a way that went beyond the work she did. The meetings, the decisions, the daily tasks, all were shared with her, and she had proven herself capable of handling it all. However, despite the respect she had gained and the progress she had made, Maria knew that her journey was far from over. The Capos, though respectful, still treated her with a hint of caution. They hadn't forgotten her place in the mansion, and though they acknowledged her intelligence, there was always that subtle line between them and her that could never be fully crossed. John, for his part, kept his distance at times, observing her with a quiet intensity that Maria couldn't fully decipher. He had seen something in her, something he hadn't expected, but there were moments when she could sense the weight of his expectations. As much as things had changed, the power dynamics between them were still shifting, still in flux. One evening, after a long day of meetings, John called Maria into his office. She walked in, her mind racing with possibilities. Had something gone wrong? Was there another task he needed her to take on? She had learned over the past few weeks that when John summoned her, it was usually for something important. "Maria," John greeted her as she entered, his voice steady, but there was a certain tension in the air. "I need to talk to you about something." Maria nodded, her heart beginning to race. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice calm, betraying none of the anxiety she felt. "Sit down." John gestured to the chair across from his desk. As she did, Maria felt the weight of his gaze on her, the same way it had felt in the beginning when she was just another member of the staff. It wasn't quite the same now, though. The respect was palpable, but it came with an unspoken pressure. "I've been thinking about the future," John began, his tone thoughtful. You've made a real impact here, Maria. You've proven yourself capable in ways I hadn't expected. Maria felt a small sense of pride swell in her chest. She had earned this. But she knew that John's words were always calculated, always with purpose. And I think it's time for you to take on more responsibility, he continued. Maria's stomach fluttered. She had already been handling a lot, but this sounded different. What do you mean? She asked cautiously. I want you to take the lead on a few more projects. You've shown that you can handle things with a level of professionalism that I don't see often. I think you're ready for more, John said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of expectation. Maria's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where she could truly prove herself. She had earned this position, and now she was being offered the opportunity to take it further. But with that came a responsibility that she couldn't ignore. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions she was feeling. John nodded, his expression softening slightly. I know you won't. Just remember, this comes with a lot of weight. The decisions you'll be making won't always be easy. Maria nodded, understanding the gravity of what John was offering. It was one thing to manage the household, but it was another to make decisions that would affect not only the mansion, but also the people who lived within it. I'm ready, Maria said, her voice firm. She had been ready for this moment for a long time. The path ahead wasn't clear, and she knew there would be challenges along the way, but she was ready to face them head on. John stood and walked over to the window, his back turned to her. Good, he said quietly. I knew I made the right choice in trusting you. For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Maria stood, feeling a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The road ahead would be uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. The future was hers to shape, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. Weeks passed since Maria had taken on the new responsibilities that John had entrusted her with. The transition was challenging but rewarding. Maria found herself navigating more complex tasks, from managing household operations to making decisions that impacted the estate's day-to-day life. The Capos, though still cautious, started to rely on her insights. Even John seemed to trust her judgment more, allowing her to make calls that he would have made himself in the past. As time went on, Maria's role became less about maintaining the mansion and more about guiding its future. She wasn't just overseeing the staff or managing the practical aspects of life in the Romano household. She was becoming part of John's inner circle. Despite the weight of the responsibility, Maria handled each day with a quiet grace, confident in the knowledge that she had earned her place in this world. One afternoon, as Maria was reviewing some documents in her small office by the kitchen, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to find John standing in the doorway, his usual commanding presence softened by something else, curiosity, perhaps, or even respect. Maria, he said, his voice steady. I need to talk to you about something. Maria stood up from her desk, her heart skipping a beat. Was it another task? A challenge to tackle? Or was it something more? Yes, sir, she asked, her voice calm but laced with a hint of anticipation. John stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. I've been thinking a lot lately, he began, his tone thoughtful, about where we're headed and the decisions that need to be made. The future of this estate, of our operations, it's all in your hands now. Maria's pulse quickened. She had been part of the team for a while now, but hearing John speak of the future so directly felt like a turning point. I understand, she replied, though she felt the weight of his words sink in. But I need you to understand something, Maria. John continued, his voice lower now. I've put my trust in you because I see something in you that goes beyond just being capable. You've become a leader, not just in this mansion, but in everything I do. I need someone who can see the bigger picture, who isn't afraid to make the hard calls. Maria's mind raced. She had already been making decisions, guiding the staff, and handling the day-to-day operations with confidence. But now, it seemed John wanted her to step into something bigger. You've earned this, he said, his voice softening for a moment. I want you to take on more. Not just the estate. I want you involved in the business decisions. The family legacy. You're the one I trust now. Maria felt the room close in around her. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. She had gone from being the overlooked Maid to someone who was now the cornerstone of John's empire. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady with determination. John smiled, though it was a rare, almost imperceptible gesture. I know you won't, he replied. I've already seen what you can do. For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding, a moment where the weight of their shared responsibility hung in the air. John had trusted her, and now she had to prove that trust was not misplaced. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Maria, you've come a long way, he said quietly. But this is just the beginning. We're in this together now. Maria watched him leave, feeling a mixture of pride and apprehension. This was her moment, the moment she had worked for her entire life. But as she sat back down at her desk, she realized just how much more there was to learn, how much further she still had to go. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Maria felt ready to face it. She had earned this place, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. As weeks passed, Maria began to realize that the weight of the trust John had placed in her was not something she could take lightly. Each day, her role within the Romano household expanded, and with it, her influence. The mansion was no longer just a place where she worked. It had become a space where she was making decisions that impacted the very core of John's empire. She had started to oversee more than just the staff. Now, she was actively involved in shaping the direction of the business itself, which was more than she had ever imagined. But with each step forward, the pressure grew. Maria felt the responsibility pressing on her shoulders more than ever. She had earned this position, but it didn't come without its challenges. She was constantly in meetings, making decisions, and dealing with situations that required a level of skill and diplomacy she had never needed before. Yet, there was a part of her that welcomed it. The days of simply being in the background were long gone. Maria was now a key player in the mansion, one who was relied upon by both John and the Capos. One evening, after a particularly long day, Maria found herself alone in her office, reviewing documents. The mansion was quiet, the kind of silence that settled after a flurry of activity. She sat at her desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting a warm light over the room. As she read through the papers, her mind kept drifting back to the conversation she had had with John earlier that day. She could still hear his words in her head, the quiet affirmation of her abilities, and the way he had trusted her to handle more. The trust. It was something Maria hadn't expected. She had worked for years in the shadows, never daring to ask for more than what was given to her. But now, things were different. She was no longer just a maid, no longer just a background figure. She had become someone who was shaping the future of the Romano Empire. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Maria looked up to see John standing in the doorway. His presence was as commanding as ever, but tonight, there was something different in his demeanor. He seemed more relaxed, more human somehow. Maria, he said, his voice calm. Can we talk for a moment? Maria nodded, her heart racing slightly. Of course, sir. John stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He walked over to her desk, standing beside it for a moment, his eyes scanning the papers in front of her. I've been watching you, Maria, he said finally, his voice low. You've done more than just handle the day-to-day operations. You've taken on more than I ever expected. Maria didn't know how to respond. She had always kept her emotions in check, but hearing John say this caught her off guard. She wasn't used to being praised in this way, especially not by someone like him. I just do what's needed, she said quietly, her voice steady. I'm here to help. John's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like warmth in his eyes. You've done more than help. You've transformed this place. You've made things run smoothly in ways I didn't think possible. You've earned my trust, Maria, and that means more than you know. Maria's heart swelled slightly, but she quickly suppressed the feeling. She had learned long ago that emotions were something to be kept in check, especially when it came to someone like John. He was powerful, ruthless even, but he had a way of making her feel like she mattered, like her efforts were recognized. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice low. I'll continue to do my best. John nodded, his expression thoughtful. I know you will, he said. He paused for a moment, then continued. I've been thinking about the future, Maria. You're an integral part of it now. I'm offering you more than just responsibility. I'm offering you a partnership. I want you to be more than just someone who runs things around here. I want you to help shape the direction of this entire operation, not just the estate. I think you're ready for it. Maria sat back in her chair, stunned. A partnership? The idea of being more than just an employee, of being a true equal in the eyes of John, was something she had never considered. She had always assumed she would remain in the background, quietly doing her job. But now, John was asking her to take a place by his side, to help him make decisions that would affect not just the mansion, but the future of everything he had built. I don't know what to say, Maria admitted, her voice soft. You don't have to say anything right now, John said, his tone reassuring. I want you to think about it. This is a big decision, and I want you to be sure. But I wouldn't be offering this if I didn't believe you were capable. Maria sat there, absorbing his words. She had worked hard to get to this point, and now, she was being offered a chance to change everything. This was more than just an opportunity. It was a test of her own abilities, of everything she had worked for. And as she looked at John, she realized that this was the moment that would define her future. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Maria felt ready to take it on, whatever it would bring. The next few days were filled with a sense of anticipation as Maria grappled with the decision John had placed before her. A partnership. The idea seemed almost surreal. She had worked her whole life in the shadows, in silence, always waiting for the day when she would finally be noticed. Now, she was being offered more than she could have ever imagined, an equal standing beside the man who had once been the only source of power in her world. As she went about her daily tasks, Maria could not shake the thought of John's words. A partnership. What did it truly mean? She had always seen herself as someone who followed orders, someone who was there to make life easier for others. But this offer pushed her to rethink everything she had believed about her place in this world. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was a force that was helping shape the future of the Romano Empire. But with this power came responsibility, and Maria knew she couldn't take it lightly. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the weight of what John had given her. His trust, his belief in her abilities. This wasn't something she could just walk away from. It was a chance to create a future for herself, one that was no longer tied to the past, to the quiet life she had led before. But there was also fear. The fear of failure, of disappointing John, of losing everything she had worked so hard to build. She had seen too many people rise only to fall, and she knew that even the smallest mistake could cost her everything. One evening, as she sat in her office, the mansion growing quiet around her, Maria heard a knock at the door. She looked up to see John standing there, his usual confidence tempered by something more, something she couldn't quite place. Maria, he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. I've been thinking. His words hung in the air, and Maria couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in her stomach. Had something changed? Was he reconsidering his offer? About what? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. John walked over to her desk and leaned against it, his eyes studying her carefully. I know this is a big decision for you, he said, his voice softening. And I want to make sure you're ready. This is not a position you can take lightly. But I've seen what you can do. You've earned this. You've earned the right to stand by my side. Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. But there was still that fear, that lingering doubt. I don't want to let you down, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to disappoint anyone. John smiled, a rare smile that seemed to soften the hard edges of his usual demeanor. You won't, he said confidently. I know you, Maria. I know what you're capable of. I wouldn't be offering this if I didn't believe in you. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket, and for the first time, Maria felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone in this. John believed in her, and that belief was enough to push aside her fears. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm with determination. I'll take the partnership. I'm ready to do what needs to be done. John's expression softened, and he nodded. Good, he said, his voice low and steady. Together, we'll make sure the future of this empire is secure. You've proven yourself, Maria. Now it's time to prove that we can do this, side by side. As John turned to leave the room, Maria sat back in her chair, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. She had made her decision. She had taken a step into the unknown, but she was ready. For the first time in her life, she felt in control, not just of her future, but of her destiny. She had earned this partnership, and now, nothing was going to stand in her way.